Hello, everyone. On behalf of Making Worlds Bookstore, um, broadcasting from Philadelphia, a city built on Lenape lands, we would like to welcome you to this discussion with Ian Manuel on his recent book, My Time Will Come, a memoir of crime, punishment, hope, and redemption. We'd like to thank our co-sponsors, Straight Ahead. We are delighted to have the opportunity to hear from Ian Manuel in conversation with David Garlock of Straight Ahead, who is working to abolish life without parole sentences. The book that is taking center stage in this discussion today is available from Making Worlds Bookstore and the links in the chats. You can visit us on our bookstore page, the link is in the chat, or on our websites. Your support for collective nonprofit independent bookstore and publishing houses is greatly appreciated and politically, culturally, and economically vital to our work. You can also join our monthly Sustainers program for Making Worlds for $5 or more. I also want to mention that we have a wide selection of books on prison abolition, including two published by our sister publishing house, Common Notions, Abolishing Carceral Society and Making Abolitionist Worlds. These are also available at Making Worlds Bookstore. We have the pleasure of welcoming Val from Straight Ahead to say a few words about Straight Ahead and today's discussion before introducing our speaker. A reminder, we'll field questions and comments in the chat, so please feel free to type in your comments and thoughts here. So with that, over to you, Val.
Thank you, Shannon. I actually couldn't hear you for some reason, but I know I'm supposed to be introducing David and Ian. So, Black and Ian Manifest. I'll start with David, the jokester. I started working with David just a few months ago, but I already feel like he's my big brother, always pranking and joking, playing around, and making work hella fun. But behind the jokes is a courageous survivor who was thrown away into the prison system in Alabama, facing a 25-year sentence for taking the life of his and his brother's abuser. David served more than 13 years in prison, where he took advantage of educational opportunities and subsequently earned his bachelor degree from Eastern University. Since his return home, he has worked as the Lancaster Program Director for New Person Ministries, a reentry program for men who have committed sex offenses and other returning citizens. He's currently the statewide Pennsylvania organizer for Straight Ahead, where we fight for an end to life without parole, or more accurately, death by incarceration, as well as fighting to create a geriatric and medical parole. David is also the co-chair of the Lancaster County Reentry Council, a statewide coalition of county reentry organizations, and he's also on the board of directors of the National Association of Rational Sexual Offender Laws. David is a really powerful educator and speaker, using his skills to inform and open the minds of the next generation of criminal justice professionals on rehabilitation and advocating in various spheres for an effective and equitable justice system. David now has a beautiful family, a wife, and the most adorable little baby. Ian, I first heard about Ian's story when I worked at Solitary Watch. I was updating our frequently asked questions about solitary confinement, and one question was, is solitary confinement used on children? And we know the answer is yes. So we had named Ian's experience as a heinous case of a child being placed in solitary. I actually hadn't heard his name again since then until David mentioned that his book had just came out, and I put these pieces together like, wow, he's out and he's alive. That's a miracle. And I really couldn't wait to read his book. It's phenomenal, y'all. If you haven't gotten a copy yet, get it. You definitely got to read it. Once you open it, you're not going to be able to put it down. I don't know Ian personally, as in he doesn't know me besides our brief email exchanges, but the mastery of his writing makes me feel like I've gotten to know him. Besides Ian being an incredible storyteller and poet, I can tell you that Ian is an extraordinary human being who has overcome some of the deepest, darkest circumstances and realities of this world. Working with people in solitary confinement for several years, I've gotten a glimpse into the depth of that pain. Of course, I can never comprehend it for real since I haven't lived it, but I've heard the madness and the boredom and the gassing, the shit throwing, the mental anguish, the death. That's not something any human being should ever experience. And Ian was a child when he was first put in solitary. I just want to acknowledge that we have someone here in front of us who survived torture in the US prison system. Not only that, but Ian was sentenced to die in prison as a child. But he was determined not to let the state decide his death. He was determined to break his chains and live in freedom on the other side of the prison walls. And that's exactly what happened. Thanks to Ian's determination and the work of the wonderful team at the Equal Justice Initiative. So that's something to celebrate in my eyes. I'm so grateful to have Ian and David both here with us today. So virtually, please put your hands together for Ian Manuel and David Garlock.
Thank you so much, Val, for that wonderful introduction. I think we could end right now and we be okay with it. But what we're going to do right now is those of you who have not heard Ian Manuel's reading or have read his book yet, he's going to go ahead and read a little bit for us. So just sit back, close your eyes, and take this in.
Thank you, David. My story has been told many times. You can read it in police files and court records, case notes, and daily logs. The story of my birth, for example, told by a judge sentencing my mother to prison soon after my arrival in this world. And there's the story of that day when I was 5, in the case notes of a social worker who drove me to a foster home and then a few days later drove me back to the projects to the room I shared with my abuser. The story of my childhood was told multiple times by juvenile probation officers who found me to be a problem best managed inside the walls of institutions. In the illustrious space, cold and intensely bright in my memory of an adult courtroom, it would be the robed and sober voice of a judge who would foretell my death when I was 13, relying on the stories of police officers, lawyers, and other accomplished professionals. He would send me to Florida State Prison, never to be released. As I said, my story has been told many times and by highly regarded experts in their fields. But today, if you'll bear with me, I would like to try to tell it to you myself. I have reason to believe that experts may be wrong about me. You see, today, 30 years later, I am neither dead nor in prison. In the stories told of my life, each begins with a crime by my mother against a neighbor, crime against me, crimes committed by me. My stories are defined by legal codes and diagnostic categories. To tell you the truth, I struggle to shake these, to describe myself to you as I am, and all that I am. My sense, though, is that this is an experience true to millions of people who, like me, happen to be born into poor neighborhoods at a time in history when the intervention of choice is arrest and incarceration, even for mothers of infants, even for young children. I would like not to begin my story as the experts have done with the story of a crime, but that is, in fact, the reality of this life. So I will begin with the story of the worst thing I have ever done, the crime I was sentenced to die in prison for. But I begin here not because, as the experts have said, this defines me. I begin here because I hurt someone very badly during a time in my life when I was blinded by my own hurt. And I want to admit to it. I want to state the truth of it. I think I owe it to her and to the child that I was. I think we need to speak about harm, what we've done, what's been done to us, because that will open doors, what will air out and begin to heal the wounds we carry and have caused. And that is what will allow for new stories to begin to be told. I'm telling you my story today because I want to tell a story of hope and meaning, of being one amongst the human family. Just read a little passage from the beginning of my book, and now I'd like to begin and doing this presentation with David.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ian, for being able to share that. It's very powerful, and it is so sad, that so many people labeled you by the crime and the crimes that happened to your family, but here we are 30 years later.
Right.
And you have been able to take back that narrative. You have changed the narrative. And that's what's so powerful, So when we think about your book, can you tell us about your writing process? What did it take for you to get all of this down and to put it together so eloquently?
It took a pretty good memory, first of all. And I started writing this book in when I was still in solitary. I began putting down, because in solitary, at least the solitary I was in at Swanee, they had a rule where you couldn't cover up with your blanket or sheets from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so I started writing when I was in this cold cell. And I found that I couldn't get past age 15. So I wrote from age 0 to age 15. And what happened at age 15 was I went to solitary confinement for long-term solitary confinement. And I couldn't get over that hump because it was so painful what I experienced that my mind, I had been pushing the trauma down. I've been pushing the pain, the abuse, the abandonment, the discouragement. I've been pushing it down for so long that to look at it freshly would cause me to be in pain. So I didn't look at that. And so when I got out, I used those first 200 pages because I wrote from age 0 to 15. It was like 200 pages. I used that as the basis to begin to do what's called a book proposal. And then once I finally got the book deal, even then I had to have a person to help me talk about the things that I wanted to talk about that I speak of in my book. So the writing process was one that began in solitary and was finished once I got out.
So you brought something up that I always talk about, is trauma. A lot of people talk about the school to prison pipeline, but I always let people know that there's a trauma to prison pipeline that is something that isn't talked about, but needs to be talked about. So with your mental health, how did you receive help when you were a child before you went to prison? And what was your treatment like in prison?
So before prison, I received no mental health help, non-existent. And there's a stereotype in the African American community about mental health. It's one that it's not a good look if you get mental health help in the African American community, at least the one I grew up in. I no longer believe that. because I now know that therapy works. But in the prison system, I was my own therapist. Poetry was my therapy, because I used to dive so deep into the depths of my imagination and disconnect from reality, so to speak. Spiritually, poetry became the way I transcended my circumstances, right? But as far as the mental health access in the prison system, it was few and far and in between. I mean, there was a lawsuit where a bunch of inmates got together and consolidated their case and sued the Department of Corrections for the cruel and unusual punishment that was occurring in solitary confinement, as well as the lack of adequate mental health care. And what came of that was a system more concerned with dotting the I's and crossing the T's to comply with the mental health aspects of the lawsuit than actually treating the people who had developed a mental illness because of solitary confinement. I learned this term during that court process called decompensate. Before we sued the Department of Corrections, I had never heard of this term decompensate, but apparently all around me is when I seen people kill themselves or I seen people slip and lose their grasp on a reality, they were decompensating, and I didn't know it at the time. But to answer your question, the mental health treatment in prison, at least in the Florida prison system, was few and far in between.
Now, in your book, you mentioned like 10 or 15 different medications they gave you. Is that the way that they dealt with your trauma and your mental health?
Yeah, because they come up with all these labels. And surprisingly, the one thing that I actually believe that I have, which is ADD, that they don't treat that in the Florida Department of Corrections. Actually, they said it doesn't exist. There's no. It might be in the DSM-5, but it's not something that the Department of Corrections treats. First of all, they said because you can't get a stimulant in the Department of Corrections, they don't want to give you a stimulant medication, and most ADHD medication is a stimulant. But the medications that I was being treated with, Depakote, Prolix, and all the list goes on, Zyprexa, Rimron.
I think you said Seroquel.
Oh my God, don't that name, Seroquel.
I already know.
Seroquel is so strong. Like thankfully, they didn't sit there and watch me take the medication. Thankfully, because if they did, I would be a zombie right now. I literally bit a chip off of the Seroquel pill. Like, so 100 milligrams. So I'm biting like a little tiny 5 milligram chip of it. And that medication is so strong, it literally knocks you out. I got some of the deepest sleep I've ever gotten from just biting a piece of the Seroquel. Yeah, Seroquel is pretty strong.
Yeah. So you were talking about how you use the poetry to escape, and also to heal. So tell me a little bit more about that, what that process would be like. Is there a thought that you would have and then your mind would just go off, or is there just different aspects of that trauma that you were trying to deal with and then the poetry would come?
So let me give you an example, and this might be a good example, and I'm probably could give more, but this is the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question. I remember being in solitary confinement one time, and there was a back window that you can't see out of because there's a plastic covering on the outside of your window that prevents you from being able to see out of your window. You couldn't see nothing but maybe the grass below you, right? But I looked in this window, and it was an iron grate with, like, just imagine 100 tiny holes in it, right? The back window. And I seen a dead wasp in there. And I tried to get the wasp out of the window. I rolled up some toilet paper. I took a piece of broom straw to try to work him out, and I could not get the wasp out of that window. And I became so frustrated. I said, it has to be a way to free this wasp. And I said, Ian, use your gift. And that's what I did. And I sat there and I immediately became inspired. And I wrote a poem called The Wasp in the Window. And I shared it with my fellow prisoners, and they were so blown away, like, wow, man, you got a very powerful, imaginative mind. And now that same poem made its way to the School of Visual Arts while I was still in solitary confinement. And the students spent a whole semester studying that poem. And now that poem is in my book, My Time Will Come. And that wasp is no longer stuck in that window. He's traveling the world now.
So that leads me to, when are we going to be blessed with Ian Manuel's book of poetry?
I have it. It's talks about it. I'm in talks about doing a book of poetry because that has always been something that I wanted to do. I definitely want to have a coffee table type book where people could actually just have the poems that inspired me in solitary confinement and that I couldn't fit into my book, My Time Will Come. Hopefully you guys will have that book within the next year.
Sounds wonderful. I'll be looking for it.
Thanks.
So in the beginning of the book, you talk about your grandma and the impact that she had on your life. And there's one point where she actually has to take you back to your mom's. What if that didn't happen right there? Do you think Ian Manuel's story would be different?
No. So what happened, how my story would be different is if my grandmother never got so sick that she had to move back to Georgia. She became so sick and could no longer control her bowels. She was in her 70s, man. And she ended up moving back to Georgia with her granddaughter, where she eventually died. Yes, had Grandma Linda not left Tampa and moved back to Georgia with her family, my life would have been totally different.
Okay. Now, another person that was very integral in your life at that time was a gentleman named Bob. So do you think if he played a bigger part in your life, because you talked about experiences with him that you had never experienced before, you were actually able to be a child. You didn't have to be an adult with him. You could be a child, so how do you think that could have impacted your life differently?
I think had I been able to grow up around a Bob in my life on a consistent basis, because like Bob told the court when I was testifying, when he was testifying before the court during my sentencing hearing, this Ian that you guys speak of, I don't know this guy. This guy's around my family. I've never had a problem out of him. He's never stole anything. He's never harmed anybody. So if I would have been able to spend more time with Bob on a consistent basis instead of just the weekend, I think that his positive influence on my life would have carried me a long way, man. And it's sad that your environment, even though the judge disagreed with it during my sentencing hearing, saying that he didn't see how a person's environment could play a pivotal role in them committing crimes. It's obvious. When I was in middle class America with my white friend Bob, I was able to just be a child and able to just relax. I wasn't surrounded by danger. I didn't have to be this big bad guy, this guy that put on a front of courage, and I didn't have to grow up too fast when I was around Bob. And I think he had a great impact on my life, and I'm glad we're still friends today.
And that's amazing. And so thankful that, he was able to just continue to stand by your side and to pour into you. And the same thing is with Debbie, the woman that you shot. Mm-hmm. Who would imagine that during this time that you were incarcerated, that she would accept your phone call? Not only one call, but I'm pretty sure 3 calls in a row.
Yeah.
And just the way that she played that integral part in your life, So tell us about that beginning relationship and where that relationship is today.
Okay. I remember receiving all of my attorney at the time was a guy named Brian Gonzalez, the guy that told me to plead guilty and I would only get 15 years. And the guy that told me he was going to appeal my sentence. His idea of an appeal was a motion to mitigate sentence. And at the time, I'm 13 and 14 years old. I didn't know any better. So once the motion to mitigate sentence got denied, and he told me, I've done all I can do. I thought my appeal process was over, right? So he sent me all the paperwork related to my case once he said, sorry, I can't do anything else for you. And inside of it, I found a police report with Debbie's address and Debbie's phone number. And being a kid and being full of imagination, I sat there and I got this idea. And all of us as human beings, and I encourage people when I'm talking and giving my speeches to not silence that voice that we hear inside of us, right? Each of us has this voice that comes up, whether it's us to chase our dreams or to do something that you don't know the outcome, and it might seem like a crazy idea, and we usually push that voice down. The voice told me to call Debbie. And I didn't quiet that voice. I listened to it. And I found in my life that every time I listen to that little voice inside and don't quiet it, things usually turn out pretty good. And I went out there in the middle of the compound where they had the phones at. And back then, the operator, you could call them live. You can get a live operator when you press 0. And I pressed 0 and I told the operator I have a collect call from Ian for Debbie. She put the call through, and I remember this lady picking up on the other end, and she said, "Can you ask him his last name?" And so I said, "Manuel." And Debbie said in a very trembling voice, I'll never forget, "Yes, I accept." And it was Christmas of 1991. I was 14 years old. So the first thing I did was say, "Miss Bakery, I'd like to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas. And I'd like to apologize for shooting you in the face." And then she asked me a question that no 14-year-old should ever have to answer. She said, "Ian, why did you shoot me?" And I just remember saying it all happened so fast. It was a mistake. And so we talked for 15 minutes. And back then we only had 15 minutes to talk. And I asked her as the phone call was ending, could I call back? She said yes. And I don't remember much about that second phone call except one thing. I asked her, could I write her? And she said yes. And that's how our correspondence started. And as far as where our relationship is today, I just texted her a couple weeks ago. I texted her Happy Mother's Day. And she said, thank you. She felt so good to hear from me. And she just texted me yesterday that she read the first 10 chapters of my book. and that she gave it 5 stars. She loved it. That she loved the story so much that it was hitting home because it was our story. So I'm just thankful that she likes the book.
I mean, that's definitely amazing and powerful, you know. And how did her being turned away from that visit in 1996? How did you feel about that, and how did she feel about it? Because here she was, she took this trek across Florida to come see you and to have that ability to look at you in the face and have a conversation.
Yeah, so she received word from my classification officer that she was not going to be able to see me. It's actually in Florida, they have it's on the visitation form. Actually, are you the victim of this inmate's crime? And when you check yes, it's almost automatic that you're going to get denied visitation. They feel like it's a security threat. They don't understand the human connection. They're thinking worst case scenario, right? They're not thinking of restorative justice and the possibility. They're not thinking restorative justice and the possibility of 2 people coming together for the common good. And so they missed the opportunity there. But down the line, God would make sure that we would meet each other face to face.
Yeah, and I remember, I think it was 2018, Equal Justice Initiative dinner in New York City. They call you up there. You're up there sharing a poem, and Debbie's up there, and Brian's sharing your story. And there was not a dry eye in the house. There's like maybe 1,000 people there, and they gave you a standing ovation. Tell me about that. What did that feel like to have your story? Because that was the biggest stage that your story was shared on, like in person. Because
yeah, it just, for me, it just brought it home. What it did for me, it was confirmation and validation that I had something of value to offer the world. You know, when you're in solitary confinement and the Department of Correction is constantly trying to strip you of your identity. They're trying to make you just like everybody else. They're trying to tell you repeatedly, hammering home, you're not special. You're an inmate. What's wrong with you? You're a number. Well, you know, this is the stuff that was constantly hammered into my head, and I'm rejecting that. I am somebody. I'm not just an inmate. I have something of substance to offer this world. And so to finally be free and hear those applause, the same type of applause that I used to hear in solitary confinement when I was reciting my poetry, right? I really knew in my heart that if I ever got out of prison, I could do this on a larger scale. All I needed was an opportunity and a platform. Because when you share your gift with prisoners, and you can get these men who have been abandoned, who have been beaten, who have been hurt, full of pain, and you can get them to respond to you in a positive way, then you can make it anywhere in the world. So I knew that it was just validation and confirmation for me, man. All those people, you're right. I remember that night. It was not a dry eye in the house. Everybody was clapping, and it was a wonderful feeling that I just want to bottle up and hold on to forever.
And I know you definitely will. So you already know at Straight Ahead that we're working to abolish life without parole here in Pennsylvania and to create a geriatric and medical parole. So do you think that we need to just go ahead and abolish the death penalty and life without parole just across the board as far as in the United States?
I'm definitely I'm definitely for it, because I'm about prison and criminal justice transformation. And that would be transformative, what you just said. You know, reform is a word that I used to say a lot. And a friend of mine recently just helped me understand that reforming something isn't good enough, that that's so broken like the prison system and the criminal justice system. It needs complete transformation. And what you just said, abolishing the death penalty and abolishing life without parole, that's transformative.
So to piggyback on that, if you were the judge and you were talking to 14-year-old Ian Manuel, what sentence would you give yourself?
Wow, that's a tough question. I know one thing. I know adult prison would not be the answer. I would do what was in place in other states. And I used to envy when I used to read about these cases of kids in other states that committed murder, and they would be sentenced to juvenile rehabilitation services until the age of maturity, meaning 21. So that's what I would have did. I would have put me in a structured situation until I was 21 years old. I was 13 at the time. So we're talking 7 or 8 years. And I would have mandated that if I was the judge, that this guy receives intense therapy during his incarceration, because this isn't normal for someone to do this at such a young age. There's something going on inside. Let's fix what's going on inside. I wouldn't have banished me from society forever. That was not the answer. And to show, I've been out 5 years. This makes year 5. They told me I was unfit to ever enter society again. I haven't felt a pair of handcuffs in 5 years, you know? So the system got it wrong.
Absolutely. And they get it wrong so many times, you know, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to show them that they've gotten it wrong and that these doors need to open. So when I think about Brian Stevenson, I mean, everybody knows how amazing he is and the work that he does. But when I think about Equal Justice Initiative, I think about the 1992 Dream Team. And that's what Brian Stevenson has done. He's put together these amazing lawyers, fellows, social workers together and has this amazing organization. So can you take us a second to just talk about one or two of these Dream Team folks that meant something or an important part of your life?
I'd like to start with one of them that doesn't get that much attention. Charlotte Morrison, Mariah's sister. And Mariah Morrison is another person. She's an amazing social worker. Completely transformed my life, visiting me all those years in prison, and helping me get my GED by copying the entire GED book and sending it to me a chapter at a time. Just being that support system that was missing, that consistency that was missing. But I think I want to start with Charlotte, because Charlotte is in charge of EJI's reentry program. And she does an amazing job, man. Like, I remember when my first public speaking engagement after I was released, she was driving me to Alabama, the University of Alabama. And she was telling me before we got there, because we was going to speak to a psychology class, she was like, listen, Ian, don't get down on yourself. This is a very conservative crowd. They might not ask many questions. I'm listening to her, and she's just trying to lower my expectations. But in my mind, I'm like, they're gonna respond to me. You like I read this book once where Jay-Z was talking to Russell Simmons with a question, and he said, I'm in these other foreign countries and they're rapping my lyrics back to me and they don't even know how to speak English. What is that? What's going on? And Russell basically told him, when you speak truth to power, that each human being has this bell inside. And when you speak truth to power, you ring that bell. They can't help but respond to the truth. And so when I had that in mind when I was speaking to this conservative crowd at University of Alabama, and Charlotte told me that day they asked more questions than she's ever heard them ask before, you know? And Charlotte just does an amazing job with just one-on-one teaching. And what I like is she brought me around her children. She has 3 beautiful kids. And she brought me around their children, and they became like little sisters to me. She didn't keep me at bay like I was a criminal. And I wasn't used to that. I was used to people doing the opposite. So Charlotte is a very special part. And then my lawyer, Ben Schaefer. Ben has been an integral part of my reentry process as well. Like, he's the reason I'm literally on time these days, because when I first got out, he was so hard on me. I think I was 5 minutes late for a module or something. And he jumped all over me like, Ian, you got to be on time. You can't be late. Levy. And so a little bit of that prison trauma kicked in, right? Where you were late for a call out or something in prison, but it stuck with me. And so I try to be where I'm supposed to be when I'm supposed to be there.
I'd have to say one for me is Miss Linda.
Oh, really? Miss Linda?
Yeah, I always love talking to Miss Linda. Whenever I call, there'd be times I just say hi to her and just hear her voice, and that would just be so reassuring. And then when I was in Alabama in the prep program, just seeing her every day was amazing. And I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think we have some questions from people that are watching and listening. So you've talked about all the dreams you had while you were in solitary for all those years, and how some of them have come to pass as far as your book, your speaking engagements. What is the next dream or two that you had that you look forward to seeing come to fruition?
The movie about my life, I definitely want that. I'm in discussions with that, talks about that now. I just think the book is fine, but we're in such a social media age. You have to do things that resonate with people, and so to put my story as a film adaptation or a TV adaptation is something that I really want to do. And then I want to do a poetry album, man. I really want to do a poetry album. And I want to do it in a way that it's never been done, a mixture of hip hop and poetry. And I really want to make that come true. And then I feel like my time is, finally here.
And also little Ian, right?
Yes. I definitely want a son or a daughter. Yes, I had to figure out what you was talking about.
So, I do have some movie star experience. I'd love to play Bob. Hey.
Oh, that's right. You played in Just Mercy. I remember that.
Yeah, and hey, I'd love to do some stuff with you as far as the poetry too. That would be great. So let's have you do one poem before we open it up for questions. And the Uncried Tears, I think that's important because it was really a place where a lot of people were able to get the first know about your poetry writing, because it was in the book Just Mercy, Bryan Stevenson's memoir, and I think it's just so powerful, and I think it would be a great way to end this question and answer part and then open up for questions.
Imagine teardrops left uncried from pain trapped inside, waiting to escape through the windows of your eyes. Why won't you let us out? The tears question the conscience. Relinquish your fears and doubts and heal yourself in the process. The conscience told the tears, I know you really want me to cry, but in releasing you from bondage and gaining your freedom, you die. The tears gave it some thought before giving the conscience an answer. If crying brings you to triumph, then dying's not such a disaster. Uncried Tears.
Thank you so much. I think Val's going to come on and help us with these questions.
Okay, if we got some.
Do we have any questions yet, Val? Okay, while we're looking for that, your time in solitary confinement, you spent 18 years in solitary confinement. Do you feel that that time could have been less and you would have been able to interact with the individuals throughout the prison and not get in trouble?
I don't think no human being needs to be in solitary confinement for 18 consecutive years. That's just egregious. That's torture. And if I would have been let out of solitary, I mean, I wouldn't have been perfect, but I definitely would have adjusted. That's one thing about me as a human. I'm very adaptable to my environment. Like, I adjusted to being placed in an adult prison at 13 and 14. You know, I had to adjust to growing up in solitary. I had to readjust to society after my release, you know? So I definitely would have adjusted to being able to be in open population for an extended period of time without getting in trouble.
So we have a question from Maddie. They said, I'd love to hear what you think could have offered healing, change, or transformation in your situation other than time in prison.
Whoa. So, see, the only thing I could think of, the wise me now, is intense therapy. So once I was released from prison, I was sent to, with the help of EJI, this intense therapy program in Arizona. And it's 7 days a week for 12 hours each day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Intense therapy, man. Psychodrama therapy, equine therapy, which is horses, individual therapy, group therapy, electric therapy. Like, it was so much therapy. I thought I was losing my mind, and I didn't know that I was going to be able to take it. And I actually called on the strength that I had in solitary confinement to help me get through the therapy I was going through. I'm like, Ian, you survived 18 years of solitary. You can survive 12 hours of therapy a day. It was intense. But it's there that I found out that therapy actually worked. because I found out I was reliving a prison scene where I was being choked by the guards and the nurses, and I was handcuffed to a gurney, and they was trying to force me to pump my stomach and I didn't have any pills in it, but they was trying to torture me. And I remember not wanting to show my weakness and not crying. And I was reliving that scene during one therapy session, and I told the guy, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. But the therapy session was over, and he didn't notice what I was saying. And I went to the next therapy session, and I told the lady, please give me some breathing techniques. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And she said, no, Ian, I want you to face what you're running from. Face it. Don't run from it. Look at it. And I looked at, and I went deep into my mind, and I revisited that time that I was so helpless on that bed, and I was crying out for help, but I wouldn't cry physically. And then I seen how helpless I was, and I just cried for that little boy. And I just cried for that little boy that was being tortured. And immediately my breath came back, and I could breathe again. And that's when I knew therapy worked. So to answer her question, I would have sent 13 to 14-year-old Ian to an intense therapy program.
Now, I mean, there's a organization there in New York called Common Justice, ran by Danielle Sarid, and they do a lot of stuff as far as restorative justice and transformative justice. So I think something like that, if you could have gone into, would have definitely been beneficial. So Madi says, what were some important conversations you had with loved ones once you came home? And what is also some advice you would give to someone just coming home? And not just somebody coming home, but somebody that's done an extended amount of time in prison.
I still have some healing to do around family members, because a lot of family members abandoned me. I mean, all of my immediate family died while I was in prison. So the ones that are left, the uncles and aunts and cousins, you know, they had left me for dead. Those conversations have not been had. I've talked to, for example, I had one cousin that left me for dead and told me never to contact her. I talked to her son when I visited my hometown of Tampa, and I was like, just tell your mom, man, I'm not mad at her. I hope she's all right. And he came back and he told me, she said, you said that about her? She don't believe it, because people expect you to give them the same hate that they gave you. But if I've learned anything from Debbie, it's that you can forgive people, man, you know, and move on with your life.
So with you doing the time in solitary confinement, it's actually perfect that we're having this conversation today, because in Philly today and tomorrow, there was actually a press conference, and there's panels and discussion about solitary confinement. There's 2 senators that are putting bills forth to end solitary confinement in the state prisons here. Wow. Our executive director is a former lifer who served 27 years, and he's been out over 3 years, you know, and he was on one of the panels. And so do you think that every state should go ahead and do away with solitary confinement totally?
So solitary confinement definitely should be did away with for juveniles. And for adults, there needs to be a cap. The UN says 15 days in solitary confinement is torture. Well, 15 days is torture. Imagine staying there for 18 consecutive birthdays, right? So it definitely needs to be a cap. And then the people that are in solitary confinement, they need improved mental health and medical treatment. It's woefully inadequate, and I would definitely change those things about solitary, you know? Yes.
Now, you were talking in your book, you know, about the way that the officers treated you. So do you think that there needs to be more oversight for the COs and the people that are running the solitary units?
Definitely need outside oversight boards, because when you leave I remember reading this in a book. Absolute power corrupts, right? Absolute power corrupts, man. And that's what they have in prison right now, absolute power. So yes, there needs to be an oversight board that oversees what people are doing. Those people are doing.
So when you walked out of prison, what was that feeling like? What were your emotions, and what was the first thing you wanted to eat?
I don't know. I don't remember exactly what the first thing I wanted to eat, but let me to describe it to the people that have never been incarcerated. Getting out of prison after 26 years feels like escaping a burning building with your life. Like, imagine waking up and your house is on fire and you're running for this window. Imagine every window that you run to is too hot to touch. And that's an appeal. Imagine that as an appeal being denied. I can't get out this way. I thought it was my way out, but instead, denied appeal. You go to the door, this door, you think it's a way out, but it's too much fire. That's another denied appeal. You go up to the attic and try to get out that way. You know, it's like escaping a burning building with your life. But guess what? My mom's dead. My dad's dead. My brother's dead. My grandparents are dead. So everything that you love, you left behind in that house, but you escaped with your life. That's what getting out of prison after 26 years feels like.
So for people that have seen the movie Just Mercy, there's a part in the movie where Ava Ansley is talking to Bryan Stevenson, and there's the ferry boat going down the river. And Ava makes this point. And she says that Bryan Stevenson is not like any normal lawyer because he actually treats the people his clients as family. Can you tell me something about that and how he treats you like family?
Yeah, it makes me think about, I was released on November 10th, 2016, 2 days after Trump was elected president. So it was probably the best thing that happened in that November besides Trump, right? But 4 days later, on November 14th, it was Brian's birthday. And Brian called me in his office and he tells me, he said, Ian, this is the guy that got everything going for him and gets, he could get anything in the world he wants for his birthday. And he tells me, Ian, having you here with me is the best birthday present I've ever received in my life. And that touched me, man. That let me know this guy cares deeply for me as a family member. He put one poem in his book, Just Mercy, and it was my poem. He's consistent. His consistency and character, man, is something that's undeniable, man. His just being there for me, not only as a client, but as a friend in my time of need, is something that I'll be forever thankful for. And I'm just glad God brought him into my life. He knew I needed a hero.
Absolutely. And kind of like what you were talking about, just his character. I mean, the role that I played in Just Mercy, along with Talmadge, Mr. Caston, and Contrell Jackson, those could have been played by actors. Right. But he wanted 4 of his clients to play those roles because we had the lived experience. How many people are actually going to do that? It's unheard of,
Or with the museum. He built the museum and he gave me an opportunity to be a part of the museum. Like right now, forever. Long after I'm gone, you can walk into that museum and pick up that phone, and I'll still be there. I'll still be around. He took where these people tried to eradicate me from Earth and made it where that people will be able to hear my story for the rest of my life and long after I'm gone, and I'm forever thankful for that.
Well, we're definitely thankful for this time, Ian, that you were here. We definitely appreciate it. Me, along with Straight Ahead, definitely appreciate it. We can't wait till you can come here in person with us and chat. Definitely would love that. And, you know, we're so thankful we were able to share your book, share your story with so many people who tuned in. So thank you so much. We are definitely looking forward to the poetry book and also the movie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, brother.
Take care.
Thank you, Ian and David, for your wisdom and your stories and for sharing it with us. We really appreciate it. We hope that you'll be able to follow through. A lot of our viewers and fans and supporters will find your work and listen to your stories. We really appreciate you. So I'm going to hand it over to Val for some closing words. Val?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Ian and David. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I think my internet's a little delayed. Okay, cool. Cool. So grateful for today. I've been so excited for this, and I just am so appreciative of everything that you shared, Ian. I learned a lot from you just now and reading your book.
Thank you. Thank you.
You were talking about that little voice, and that I felt that, like, that's so real. That's so real. Everything you said. And yeah, definitely can't wait for your book of poems to come out and for everything you're gonna do. And yeah, thank you, David, for engaging in this dialogue. This is great. Thank you, everyone, for coming out and tuning in. Definitely buy Ian's book right now if you have it, and don't let it sit there. You got to read it.
Yeah.
Follow on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. We are at Toward Abolition. And yeah, let's all just work to make this that we want to see. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, comrades.